Hello and welcome to this video. Yeah, this is a new kind of video that I haven't done before like that, but I wanted to try this out. And it's chess openings Q&A. So your questions answered, as best as I possibly can without taking 20 hours to prepare it. I have to say. So if you got a question like, okay, what should I play like here, and give me a full repertoire, I won't do that, but I'm able to without doing 20-hour prep to give some, I think, decent advice on opening questions. So if you have questions about openings, what to play or whatever, it's a wide range, message me or post a comment to this video, and I'll see what I can do in future ones. So I need something to kick off, and I'm going to do that with a question that was posted to the chess section of Reddit yesterday. And I thought it is an interesting question because it's a type of question that is quite often asked. I haven't set this up properly so that you can just read the post. Switching to Reddit, I'm just telling you it's not a big text. It's posted here, or the question is a d4 defense that dovetails with Alkynes defense. The poster says he revamped his black repertoire and studied Alkynes defense. What are suggestions for an aesthetically, thematically similar response against d4? All right, so I'm giving you some information what I think. This kind of question is quite often met. Like, I like to play this and that against e4. What should I play against d4? Is there something that is somewhat similar or shares themes? There are some cases where openings are indeed somewhat similar, in particular in regards to pawn structure and color complexes. For example, it's a very well known suggestion and frequently seen that you can somehow group the Slav and the Caro-Kann into a repertoire. So, for example, in the classical Caro, just playing this, it's not super critical to the whole thing. You see this pawn structure here, and this pawn structure with black having swapped the d pawn against e pawn or sometimes c pawn, and then playing e6, c6 is very typical for the Slav and for the Caro. So this is something that somehow fits well quite together. Or for example, let's say against d4 you play the King's Indian, where you will oftentimes get a closed center like that. And then similarly against e4 you could build a repertoire. I mean, this is obviously complex because white can do all kinds of things, but let's assume he plays the Rui, which is still most frequently seen. You could for example play something like this, which has a definite resemblance with f5 coming later. So sometimes you have shared pawn structures with openings from d4 and e4. And some players indeed choose their openings in that regard, so that the structures are similar. There are, however, players, and very successful players, even with a very narrow opening repertoire, who play entirely different structures. There are many examples for that. The most striking one that comes to mind for me is somebody you might not really know all that well. This former Russian, now for many years Netherlands, Dutch grandmaster Sergei Tivyakov. Tivyakov with black plays against e4 always the Sicilian, and usually plays a dragon type of setup. He dabbled a little bit with the Scandinavian, but usually he plays a dragon, accelerated normal dragon. And against d4 he absolutely always plays the Nimzo Indian and the Queen's Indian defense, which is totally different. It shares no common features. Sometimes people choose along common features, sometimes they don't. And for some openings, the issue is, and this is now as we get to the actual post, is with the Alkynes, it does not have a particularly typical pawn structure. Because after e5, not the move that you necessarily meet on the club level. They often play knight c3 there. But if you look at the absolute main continuations from here, the pawn structures are quite diverse. For example, after c4 and here white takes, you can take with the c pawn, you can take with the e pawn, which is entirely different. Or if white plays knight f3, it is a huge range of things that black can do. Can go g6, bishop g4. It's not really a very clearly defined structure. Therefore, the Alkynes does not really have something that is so clearly similar. Let's say Slav and Karo. I mean, there are differences there as well, but there are themes there. And in the Alkynes, there is no particularly clear pawn structure that is defined. So the question is, in this case, what exactly attracts the author to the Alkynes? We don't know exactly because he only posted this couple of sentences. But there are a couple of things, however, that come to mind. With the Alkynes, you play a slightly offbeat opening. It's not a total main line, and very often the white players will face that like once a year, tops, sometimes less. It depends on how many games they play. But it might be that they never get it for 2 years, 3 years, whatever, at least in classical chess, if we talk about that. So it's a surprise and nothing that white usually will have big prep on. Also, it is rather provocative, and oftentimes white players don't really like to play against the Alkynes, which makes relatively little sense because it is generally a rather comfortable opening for white if you know something. But often people are annoyed, like, okay, he's playing that and I have no prep and so on. It's one of those annoyance openings. And what is definitely coming into mind, if you play the Alkynes and like this opening, then you don't mind to have a space disadvantage. This is something that will happen quite often. If you look at this, black of course will attack the center, but he will be a little bit lacking space. So it's not a classical opening where you put pawns in the center. So if we now transfer that to 1d4, what would be similar? Again, we don't have a clearly similar pawn structure that we can go for because the Alkynes has no defined pawn structure that comes to mind. So what could we do? So I think if we search for something that is somewhat similar in terms of spirit, in terms of attitude, let's say, it should be not a main line, probably not a symmetrical opening, so probably not 1d5, yeah, let's say. And we don't really have to care much about giving the other side a little bit of space because it seems that this is not a cause for concern. It's an important factor, yeah, to think about, do you want to give them space or not? It is very likely that on a meta level, yeah, it is very likely that black should play something with d5 against d4. Yeah, even if you look at Alpha Zero, what it is doing, or Lila, yeah, they never play whatever, something that allows a pawn to d5. And there is probably some grain of truth to that, but this is not relevant for human chess, and in fact, particularly not for chess that is not on the 2800 level. So you can play lots of things that are similar to the Alkynes in nature, provocative and a little bit offbeat, that doesn't mind to have a space disadvantage. First one comes to mind is knight c6. This move is actually not that terrible. However, it is, I think, less sound than the Alkynes. For one very clear reason, this pawn is not hanging. So white is not actually forced to push the pawn. Not that this is a bad move. Pushing the pawn is not a bad move. But he's not forced to do so. And he has more options. And oftentimes what black will have is some sort of transposition into something that he might not want to play. This is, however, still rather playable. There is nothing particularly terrible about it. Yeah, you can play that. I mean, white is going to be a bit better with e4 or other sensible moves. But I don't think that this is something where you will necessarily lose quickly or anything. It requires a bit of study, as does the Alkynes, but it is a playable option. Many players will not play d5 but rather develop. Yeah, so knight f3 for example. And now we get to what I said, he is not forced to push it. Now you have to make a decision that, I don't know, it's not so easy to make. Do you want to do this? I don't think you want. Yeah? Knight e5 here looks odd. And if you don't play d6 and allow d5, what do you play? You probably play this, and then you're in some sort of Goren, yeah, after c4 and so on. So it has some drawbacks, but you have to see that white players don't really know anything there, and it's not clear that they know anything about the Goren either. Other thing that is interesting is that after c4, e5, I think is quite reasonable. This is a very reasonable opening, actually, because if white pushes d5, which is very likely, you will get a very decent game with knight e7 to g6, or maybe even inserting the check. This is totally fine. So there are some things here that are completely okay for black. So it's not so terrible. This is one suggestion that was made in the thread. I wouldn't really play knight c6 against title players that can prepare, or only if I really invest lots of time to patch some holes. Another suggestion that was made was that black knight's tango, which is indeed somewhat similar to the Alkynes in terms that this knight chase is possible. It's interesting that in this Reddit thread somebody suggested that the black knight's tango would be a bad opening, and instead suggested the Benoni, which I found funny because the Benoni is very likely just worse than the tango. Okay, I played the tango quite frequently in tournament chess, and I can say I don't really think it is so bad. One thing you have to, however, take account of, white does not have to play d5, and most players don't do this. They play knight f3, knight c3, and it is actually not a theory light opening. There are many things you have to know in terms of move orders, for example. After knight f3, you probably go e6, and after knight c3, all of a sudden you play a Nimzo Indian, or after g3, you go into a Bogo Indian, and so on. It is an interesting opening, but it is rather heavy on theory. It's not something that is so easily learned in a quick session. So these are the openings based on quick knight c6. I think the tango is sounder than knight c6 on move 1, but it's more sophisticated than you might think. In particular, if you don't have much background in the openings you might transpose into. For example, if you know the Nimzo and know, let's say this line, then adopting the tango is not so much of a big deal. Yeah, but if you don't know that and you don't know the Bogo, so it's lots of work. So these are the knight c6, early knight c6 lines that have some resemblance to the Alkynes. So what else is there that you can do that is kind of non-symmetrical and provocative and somewhat offbeatish? So what comes to mind there are clearly two types of opening families. One is the Benoni type of opening. So the immediate c5, or knight f6 and c5, or knight f6, e6 and c5. They're all somewhat related. This is definitely not a bad choice, because you will always get a non-symmetrical position, which is almost invariably true also for the Alkynes. So it's non-symmetrical, it is somewhat fighting. On the other hand, what you need to take into account is that it's not an opening that is so kind to you if you don't know some critical lines. For example, if you play this move order and you play a modern Benoni, if somebody plays f4 against you and you're out of book now, you will very likely lose the game. Yeah, because you're just getting steamrolled in the center. So it's something where concrete knowledge of some lines is totally necessary. It's simply not possible to do without. Otherwise, somebody who is good with dynamics or just knows some lines will just kill you. So the modern Benoni is something that needs to be studied quite thoroughly. Other Benonis are a little bit lighter on theory. For example, if you play c5 immediately, and they go d5, and now you play something like, let's say, e5, yeah? This is something that you can play basically almost without any theory. Here the idea is that you set up this closed center and later try to play some kind of f5 or prepare b5. Most likely you won't manage all those breaks if white plays well, but this is something that ticks some boxes at least, yeah, some sort of closed Benoni. Similarly natured opening is this, the check Benoni, which is the same pawn structure, only difference is white already is on c4, which makes a difference. An advantage to this kind of opening is that, similar to the Alkynes, white players don't get it on the board often. They will not be familiar with details, and you might compensate some slight lack of quality with more experience and knowledge. A good thing about this is that this opening can be played almost without any concrete lines in mind, because the nature of the position is so closed. Yeah. On the other hand, it's not very much confrontational at the very beginning, which is more what the Alkyne is. So this is a good non-symmetrical type of opening if you want less theory. An interesting, different non-symmetrical approach would be f5, the Dutch. And this is actually something that I feel goes quite well with the Alkynes. It's provocative. It's often annoying to the white player. I know many players who say, the Dutch, I don't like that. I'm not quite sure, again, why they dislike the Dutch to play against it. But one thing is, you don't get it on the board quite as often as white, and you maybe only have a vague idea. So I think the Dutch is not a bad idea to consider as a partner opening to the Alkynes. It's annoyance value, provocative, it's fighting, it's non-symmetrical. It could be a good partner opening. What else is there? What is non-symmetrical? Actually, not that much. An opening that would, I think, to some regard fit well is, however, the Grunefelt. It's something I want to mention. It's a scary opening in some way to play, because it has that reputation of being super high theoretically critical, with many forced lines and sharp play and so on. All right, this is true, but it depends a lot on who your opponent is. Let's say if you're an 1800 player and you play another 1800, the other guy won't know some 15 lines of sharp theory and checkmate you or whatever. I don't see that happening. And if you study the Grunefelt, it shares some themes of the Alkynes. That's something that we have to take into account. It gives white a center, that you can attack and try to undermine. This is quite similar, in fact, to the Alkynes. Both openings belong to that somewhat hyper-modern school where you give up the center temporarily and then attack it. So the Grunefelt is not something that is totally out of the question, and it's not an opening that is in fact popular on the sub-professional level. I don't see that often. If I often watch games below 2000, like from teams of my club or in junior competitions, and the Grunefelt is very rare. It's very rare. People are scared, I think, of it, to adapt it with black, because they go, it's so much theory. Yeah, it's not like easy, but it's also not something that you should be totally scared of. And it might be something that you enjoy, because it shares some aspects in terms of giving up center and then attack it. This is a counter-attacking opening. So maybe this is also something that comes into consideration. So it's not something where this whole question, it's not something where I have a very clear answer. Yeah, it's not so easy. One general advice that I can that I can give is, if you searching for opening ideas and you have some sort of idea, like I could play that, this idea comes to your mind, what I suggest is invest a bit of time. You don't need to invest like, I don't know, 50 hours, yeah, but just some hours. Try to look at some games that you can find of this opening. Recent games played by master players, played by specialists. It helps if you have a database or some tool available. And then after this rough study of a couple of hours, see how you fare in some online games, blitz chess, rapid chess, and just see how it works, how it feels, how you adapt to the position. If you feel totally uncomfortable and score nothing, then discard the whole thing. Just discard it. Don't really think much about it anymore. If you feel it could work, like you feel, well, the results are good and so on, then invest a little bit more time. Do some sort of test runs and see how it works. It depends on how much time you have, how long that test run might be. For example, a couple of years ago, I thought about playing the Caro-Kann, and I took a little bit more time. I mean, also, well, it depends on how crazy you are. I took like maybe 20-25 hours to get a basic idea about the Caro against good opponents, and then I played it in 100 or 200 blitz games, and then checked my results and they were bad. I found out that I cannot play this well and I have lots of problems, and then I discarded the thing. With other openings, with a similar way of adapting it, it worked differently. For a long time, for example, I played the Slav with a6, this line, the Chebenenko, and I did the same approach. I studied the basic lines and then I played it in blitz, and I immediately scored very well. So I recognized, okay, this is an opening that I can play, and I played it quite successfully for many years. So this is a good idea. If you have some kind of concept in mind, do some basic study, then try it a little bit out in online chess. It doesn't hurt if you lose a couple of games and you get some grasp if you like it or not. Let me just think about this. I did not prepare this video at all, as you probably noticed. Let me just think about if there is some other opening that you could play that is similar, somewhat similar in terms of provocativeness. No, not really. I mean, within the Dutch, I mean, I was kind of suggesting the Dutch. Within the Dutch, you of course have to choose the line, yeah, what to play. If you play a Stonewall or if you play a Leningrad Dutch. If you're coming from the Alkynes, I would rather go for the Leningrad and not for the Stonewall. Stonewall is not too bad, but the Leningrad is a little bit more dynamic and a little bit more confrontational. Also, my experience is what players tell me, they, given the choice, they rather play against a Stonewall than against the Leningrad. So I would rather go for the Leningrad here with G6 than the Stonewall. If you say paired with the Alkynes, in terms of sharpness and being provocative, I think this is a better fit. But just my brief opinion without knowing the specifics of this poster, his abilities or whatever. So just a little bit of a video to discuss some opening ideas to kick off this concept. So if you have questions about openings, post them in this video and we'll go along from there. Thanks a lot for watching. I hope you enjoyed it.